as much as you can take copy from customer quotes, from just market research, whether it's like the exact quote or like the sentiment behind that. It's like understand how other people see you and the value that other people say that you bring, right? And lead with that versus like what you put in the pitch deck, right? Of what you think about your brand rarely matters.
You're listening to Content Logistics,
a podcast for B2B marketers where we explore the foundational
and sometimes frustrating elements of content.
We're talking to the experts, learning all their tips and tricks, and sharing them with you.
We don't gatekeep here. Let's get started. Hello and welcome to another episode of Content Logistics. We're your new hosts, Dallion, and I'm Baylee, and we're so excited to be here. We want to give a huge thank you to Camille Trent as well for passing the mic and for her incredible work on the show. Today, we actually have Camille joining us as a guest.
Welcome, Camille. We're so excited to have you on the show today.
Thank you. I'm stoked to be here. I'm just happy that this show is living on and happy to still be a part of it.
Thank you for joining us in the guest seat.
Of course. It's weird. It's weird being on the other side, but it kind of takes a little bit of pressure off. It's nice to just I'll lean back in my chair maybe at some point. Yeah, I'm just happy to chat with other content marketers. It's kind of like a big reason that I started it is just to have these types of conversations. So I'm happy to be on either side of it.
We'll try not to grill you too hard. We want you to enjoy this.
Yeah, it's got to be a softball one, right? Like it's the first transition episode. You got to give me softballs.
Yep. Well, we are actually really excited about today's topic. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. We are all going to talk about our biggest content icks. As content marketers, we all create and consume a lot of content. I think probably between the three of us, we've worked with hundreds of clients, maybe more. So we've seen a lot of the same mistakes occur very frequently. So in today's episode, we want to discuss what some of those most common mistakes are, and most importantly, how we can avoid them as content marketers. So each of us are going to share our biggest 3 icks, and we're just going to have a fun chat about it. So we'll get started, Dallion. I want to hear what your biggest content ick is.
I'm excited to get into it, and I can't wait to hear your thoughts, Camille. Because like you said, talking with other marketers about this is so fun. And when we interface with clients all day, we don't really get an opportunity to talk about some of these things. So please cut me off if I go too long on this first one, because I feel extra passionate about it. But my first content marketing ick is when I hear the word content room, content or media room. So I have worked for a couple of companies now, and I have heard this from clients of ours that they want to do content. It comes from a great place. That's great that they want to do content. But then they want to create a content room. They want to paint the wall behind them. They want to do a whole backdrop. They want to get lighting. They want to do the huge production value. And the reason that I don't love this idea, unless you have an in-house content production team, if you have that, great, go for it. If you don't have that, you're a small B2B marketing team, you are literally boxing yourself into 4 physical walls, and you're creating limitations that are going to stop you before you even get started, because you're creating more work than you need to. And when you're small and you've got a message to get out, you need to get it out quickly. And you need to create a process that's sustainable for everyone. And I think that companies a lot of times get overexcited and they want to just go full in on content, but they're not thinking about the long-term sustainability of how do we keep creating this content and how do we create it fast. So that's my first content ick. Have you guys heard of that?
Yeah. I like that. Yeah, it's literally, like you mentioned, boxing yourself into something, right? Like we use that as a cliche, but in this case, like you're physically boxing yourself in with that idea. And it does actually remind me of like something that I always remind myself of, or like a rule sometimes that I have of, well, 2 things. Like one is if the medium itself is getting in the way of doing the thing, that's a problem, right? And so I'll recognize this with me of if I'm deciding, okay, do I start brainstorming this thing in Miro? Like, do I do it in Word doc? Should I do it in Sheets? Like, if the medium is like the blocker for just getting started and like putting you should just put pen to paper, right? Like we still have that technology. And so, yeah, so sometimes it's just like, just start with, almost always just like, just if I'm worried about it, I just like start with a Word doc, right? Or in this case, like start with your iPhone, right? I actually have an Android. I'm like the one marketer that has an Android, but start with, your phone and your camera, right? Just do that, because otherwise there is like an element of perfectionism that I think is present, especially in content marketers. I think in all people, in all marketers, but I think especially content marketers, just because a lot of times early on in school, you were judged by the details, right? And judged by perfection in a way. And so it can be hard to like sort of like beat that out. And so like beat that out of you. So that's what comes to mind of like, if it's becoming a blocker in speed or just getting your idea out there, especially if you're a startup, especially if you're a small company, it's a problem. And the other thing is I remind myself of create something worth scaling. Like it's become like a little bit of like a motto for myself, right? So if you don't have that first thing, like if you haven't nailed the idea or like the thing that's resonating because you haven't put enough ideas out there because you're so hung up on the execution or the media, there's no point in like trying to scale it. So when someone's like, okay, we need this backdrop, we need this professionalism, because they're thinking about like being an enterprise company, they're comparing themselves to these like good inspirations, right? But like companies that are like 1,000 people, right? And like you shouldn't compare yourself to that. So those are the two things that come to mind, is like first focus on like finding out what good content is, which you probably haven't at that stage, right? Figuring out what the thing is that people want. And then you can worry about making more of it and making it more professional and making it more scalable.
100%.
I'm just going to hop in. I have just one quick, really funny story about this I want to share. But one of the companies I worked for, they spent like $30,000 on camera equipment. But not only did they spend $30,000 on, it might have actually been more. It was so much money. They just kept buying equipment. But then the next thing was they were like, we got to wait to make content until we build our new facility.
Yep.
And this was probably like a $1.5 million facility. So it was just like putting off so much stuff we could have done in the months that it took to build out this new facility. And I do think there is value to like high production content, but that shouldn't be every piece of content you're putting out there, obviously. So just getting started, I think, has so much value.
I think it happens more than we think. Like it happens a lot. I have also personally worked at companies that have tried that, and you really waste a lot of time and a lot of resources, and that's something that small marketing teams can't afford to do.
And a lot of times when you're saying, oh, we're going to put off content until XYZ, is you're really saying like, I'm going to put off marketing. Like when you think about that it sounds insane, right? We're just not going to market for a year or so. And obviously there's other forms of marketing. Maybe they're still doing some more transactional things. Maybe they're still doing ads. But, a lot of your marketing engine is content. Like the content is what goes out. It is like the messaging to some degree. And so to put off your marketing is not the wisest choice.
No, not smart. I'll go into my next ick. This is a tough one, but it's when we see a sales team creating their own content and sharing it on social media. This is a ick of mine because I see it across the board. And again, I think it comes from a really good place. And sales teams, they want certain things, and maybe it's like low down on the marketing team's list. And so they're like, and now we have so many tools that are accessible to us, like Canva and, whatever, all the things that allow people to be graphic designers who aren't trained in the art of graphic design. But, I see a lot of people, putting out really off-brand content and trying to do content, but they're actually hurting the brand. And they're actually, they don't have their message honed in. It's not the right colors, it's not the right font. Like that stuff does matter. And so when I see that from a company, I feel like it really shows this like disunity and like division within the company. And marketing and sales teams need to be really synced on like what they're putting out for the world to see. And I think that sales teams kind of want to get ahead of marketing in that aspect when they're like, no, we need this and we need it right now. So That's my second ick.
I think I'm gonna zag a little bit on this to make this extra spicy. So I think first off, I'm 100% aligned. Like sales and marketing need to be aligned, and when they're not like that, that's when these challenges occur. And so I think it's more like around the incentives, like how. And I very much like believe that, you know, certain business models like do need a sales team. And so this is like where it's challenging of oftentimes that that salesperson's paycheck depends on their performance, right? And so when you're asking someone, hey, like first off, do one-to-one sales, right? It's like marketing more like that one-to-many, but you're like on the one-to-one side. And so for them to have to kind of like wait on marketing to get them like the right content, right? Like that would be I'm not sure if as a salesperson, I'm not a salesperson. If I was, that I would do that, right? Like if I felt like I had like a better messaging or content to that, and my success like is directly tied to my paycheck, right? Like I can totally understand like why they do that. And I've seen like salespeople with a good brand, like professional brand. Like I think there's a sweet spot here that have done well this way, right? But I think I do agree with you that like it's not ideal, right? It's like it's not ideal for content marketers. It's not ideal for the marketing team. And so it goes back to as long as like you're in sync with the sales team of like, you know, here's when I'm going to deliver this thing. Here's how the campaign's going. Here's our part. Here's your part. Here's the handoff. And then ultimately, if you do that with like one campaign and build trust, and then they understand like that marketing works, because I do think it like the onus is on marketing and in content of like proving, hey, like I can help you and I will help you make more money. So as long as, I think ideally, you're just like super in sync. You prove like your content out, you prove like your sales materials, right? And then like I think everyone will be more on board because they're bought into, okay, if I do it this way and if we're all aligned, everyone wins, right? Whereas like if I go off on this and then one thing is incorrect, like you're also risking your job that way, right? If you're like misrepresenting the brand. So I don't think it's ideal. I guess what I'm saying is like I understand how it happens, and I could understand, like I could see myself like doing that in certain circumstances. And so maybe I'm like protecting myself from bashing this too hard.
Yeah, no, that's true. I hear that. I guess in an ideal world, you like sales and marketing would be going in the same direction, and
yes.
Your content would be valuable to them, and they wouldn't feel they needed to create their own. That would be ideal situation.
Oh, but because I agree. There's so much. I mean, I think we can all agree. There's so much cringe content like on LinkedIn in general, and especially if it's like an ill-disguised like sales message, right? That is misrepresenting the brand, and so it does feel like on the content end, like you're undoing some like goodwill that we've built here, right? And so, like it's definitely an ick on the content side of things. Just coming from sales tech, I'm like, okay, what's the salesperson like gonna say like on this too? Like, what's their reasoning? So, I can see it both ways.
I'll go into my third. This is around email. Something that I hear a lot from my clients is this sentiment that they're going to annoy people with their emails. This idea that like, oh, we can't send too many emails, or oh, we just sent an email last week, so we can't send another one today because that would be too short of a window, and we really don't want to annoy our prospects or annoy our customers. And I find that to be a little bit odd. And I guess that's because personally, the brands I love and messages that resonate with me, like you can't email me and market to me enough. Like, and if I get annoyed with you, I'm not your customer. So in my mind, I find that sentiment like interesting. And it's also like, I think of email, I'd love to hear your thoughts, both of you, about this, but I think of email as like a great place in marketing to have fun and to test out ideas and to distribute a variety of different content. And like, we're not launching the next issue of Vogue. Like, it's an email. Like, it's okay. If it doesn't hit, it doesn't hit. If it resonates, great. And you're going to learn something from it that you can take into your next email. Like, email should be like an ongoing thing. And so I see some of my companies I work with that are like, they're like sending a quarterly email, and they think that this email is like, it's it. And I'm like, the people might not even see this. Like, if our subject line isn't good, no one's even gonna open it. And so I just like, I'd love to hear your thoughts about email and content and how people think about that.
It's especially something for B2C, right? So I'll separate these of like there's B2B, B2C, and B2B especially like does seem to be like extra precious. This kind of goes back to your first one, right? Of like taking too much time like to think about the exact execution and how to get it right, how to get it perfect. It's kind of like the same problem, right? Of like we'll have this one report and it's this one email and like that's our shot like for the quarter. Like that's how we're going to meet our goals. So it's especially prevalent there. I have seen it go, like, it can go overboard in B2C, right? Like where it's like multiple emails a day we're talking though. Like that's like where it can like be other extreme that are very like, transactional, but there's a place for that, like product nudges. But going back to the content side, I tend to side with you of, I see that as a challenge for content marketers of how do we create content that people look forward to, like that they enjoy, like that, how do we become a content brand as coined by some good content, right? So I think like making that the goal, making that like the pinnacle of success in a lot of ways for email can help like mitigate some of this of like if people are annoyed about it or we feel like they're annoyed with it or we're getting some of that feedback, like it's probably because the content isn't resonating. Like it's either we don't know our audience well enough or we're being too lazy like about the execution, right? It's like somewhere in there like that we're missing. So I tend to always think that it's not about like the cadence, it's about the content.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point that we want to make just really valuable content because then they're not gonna be annoyed with it. I think too, I like your idea, Dallion, of testing out content and testing out ideas. Every email doesn't need to go to your entire list. Like you can A/B test it, like test out things just to try and see what resonates.
Yeah, maybe that's a topic we can get into in another episode where we really like drill down into some of these things. Obviously, this episode's a little bit of a icebreaker for us all, where we're kind of talking about these things, But I do think that there's a lot to resonate with because we have all seen it. Like we've all seen it, and if you're a marketer on a small team, like I'm sure that one of the icks that the three of us are going to share, like you've seen it, or you've seen it, or you're going to see it.
At some point.
Yeah.
Awesome.
And you talking about the relevance too, like that goes to the strategy. So you mentioned like it might not, it's probably not relevant. You're probably not talking to the right people, and that goes to the strategy. Or like if it's not if the strategy's sound, you believe in that, then you look at like the execution. It can just be like as simple as that of, is our strategy right? Yes or no? Is our execution right?
Let's hear yours, Baylee.
Okay, my first one, and this one might just be a personal preference, so if you don't agree with it, just let me know, is I think when we're creating content, design should definitely be a part of that content, especially with the distribution as well. So my ick is when design is just an afterthought. And I think of this with like a blog post. If the blog post doesn't have images or videos or it's organized with headers, that is a big red flag to me. Like I want something pretty to look at, and I also want valuable content. What are your thoughts, Camille?
Yeah, this is a good one. I think in an ideal world, this is the way to go. And I've seen like campaigns move a lot slowly because you're really just thinking high level. You're thinking campaign level, right? Of like, what are the inputs and like, what are the elements like of this campaign? So if you're thinking that from the beginning of like, what does success look like? Then I think it involves like what videos, like what images, what is the text component of that? So yeah, I think when possible, I feel like it can be hard at the blog level, right? If you have like a high cadence to do that, because in the editing phase, I think it's good to know, okay, we're going to have X, Y, and Z at the beginning. It's part of the brief. And then as you go, you add more things, right? So I think like knowing here's our baseline for making sure there's enough, media in this one piece of content, and then just be open to like adding other things along the way. But yeah, that's the goal.
Yeah, definitely. There can be revisions along the way, and kind of going back to our first thing, like it's better to have something than nothing. Doesn't need to be the highest quality every time. But yeah, I like a good image. I like colors in my blog posts.
For sure.
So then my next biggest ick is when there's no fresh content. If I go to someone's website and I see they haven't posted a new blog in 6 months, or someone's YouTube channel and it's been dry for over a year, that to me is a really big red flag, because I think one, they probably maybe have chosen a medium that isn't very sustainable for them. And I rather see that they're posting consistently than to see that it's been or not see even anything at all. Maybe I feel like to me it kind of like just hurts the brand when there hasn't been any posts for a while than to maybe not see that they even have an account. So that's my thoughts on that. What do you think, Camille?
Yeah, it's not only like disappointing, it like gives me anxiety, like whether it's some like a place that I'm working and I feel like we're lagging behind on some channel, like that especially gives me anxiety. But then for like secondhand anxiety as well, like whether it's I don't know, a small business, and this is content and marketing as a whole, where I'm like, like if only you could just post like more regularly, or like create content more regularly. Like it can just be repurposing. Like that's like the second thing is like I understand not having time. I think all of us like very much understand not having the bandwidth, and so there's just like such an opportunity though with repurposing. It's like you probably have something else, like there's an opportunity to repurpose that. So those are the ways that it gives me like just like internal dread.
I know when you said the YouTube channel, I was like, I felt like something in my stomach. I know it's like I hate when I see that, because you feel like they bit off more than they can chew, and you can just tell immediately. Like if they haven't posted on YouTube in the last 6 months, like their YouTube channel is dead, and it can be revived, and I'm sure they have content sitting around that they could be repurposing and redistributing in a fresh way. You don't have to constantly be creating new content to constantly be distributing content. And I think people get confused and kind of lost in that. And again, would love to go into that a little deeper in some further episodes.
Yeah, that's a great clip right there.
I think too, you don't need to be on every single channel. So I like your point too of biting off more than you can chew, Dallion. Pick 1 or 2 channels that you can do really well and consistently, and then just go from there. So then my next and final ick, and this is probably my biggest ick, is what I like to call selfish content. Ultimately, it's just a sales pitch. It just focuses on the company. And while this content has its place sometimes, I think it can be really damaging to a brand when all the content is really just focused on who they are as a company rather than focusing on the audience and the problems that they solve. I find that especially businesses that are just getting started tend to do this a lot. They're maybe figuring out what the right messaging is or how they fit into the market, but it just switching that framework of solving what problem are you solving really just makes a big difference.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah, my thing with this is reminding myself that nobody cares like what you have to say about you, right? Like you being like the brand, right? So as much as you can take copy from customer quotes, from just market research, whether it's like the exact quote or like the sentiment behind that, it's like understand how other people see you and the value that other people say that you bring, right? And lead with that versus like what you put in the pitch deck, right? Of what you think about your brand rarely matters.
Yeah. I used to work with a really smart content marketer. She used to sit in on the sales calls and or go back and listen to the recordings of them. And she would take notes on things that the actual customer would be saying about the brand. And every marketer should be doing this. And I know it's not like the funnest thing in the world to sit on a sales call, but you can get some gold, like hearing what other people are saying about you. Because like you said, like, you may think, here's my 5 benefits, but the customer might have a completely different perspective, and being able to share that and understand that so that you can push it back out is really important in content marketing. And again, I think a step that a lot of people miss just because they don't know how to do it. They're just like, oh, we have this product and I get it out. We got to say this and that and that. And you got to kind of like take a step back, I think. And it can be hard for content marketers because you're also being pressured to move quickly.
Yeah, for sure. That's a good one.
Awesome. We'll transition over to our big finale then, Camille. We would love to hear your biggest icks.
Yeah, I went kind of small scale for this, but I thought it'd be fun to literally take like the the three that came to mind that I spitballed to you initially. So the first one that came to mind that I've seen joke posts about as well, like every content marketer can sort of relate to, is the generic SEO blog intro, right? And so we've all seen it. I think actually I pulled up a couple like good examples here. Yeah. Okay. So a couple that come to mind, and these were AI assisted. But I saw these same intros before AI. So we were doing this. We've been doing this for like a long time. Call it fall. So yeah, the landscape of work is rapidly evolving
Yep.
in today's competitive job market.
Oh no.
So just like the cliche, like trying to make a case for something, but just very like lazy, like doesn't want to get into like the trends. And so it's like, I'm just asserting this. And so if everybody is asserting that it's a problem, we just tune it out, right? We're just like, I don't believe you. Like, or even if I do, it's like, no, duh. Like, why did you have to put that sentence in there? And so honestly, like one way that I combat this sometimes if I'm editing my own work or someone else's work, almost always, and this applies to a LinkedIn post, applies to a blog post, applies to almost everything, is just like chop off the first paragraph, chop off the first like 3 sentences. And I once heard somebody describe this as like the water hose kind of like effect, right? So you turn on the water hose, you have to like let the dirty water like spill out a little bit before like the clean water starts running. And like the new houses, same thing. Like you just kind of have to like let your mind like get all the garbage out, like because like we have some booting up time basically, like where it's like our brains are like just getting into the flow kind of for something. So you just like stream of consciousness, let it all out, right? Like let the first few like sentences out, but then just be sure to go back and like delete all of that. And then sometimes you have to replace it. Like you do sometimes still need you need to set the stakes. Like you need people to care about what you're about to say. You need to give them a reason to keep reading. And so I think like the concept behind it just needs to be like a little bit more thought out, right? And so this is where like the research can come in, like, and it can still be pretty generic though if it's like 70% of whatever have said. But so my test for that is just, would it feel like an insight to me? Does it feel kind of like a light bulb moment of like, oh, like yeah, that's interesting. Like I'll keep. So it has to kind of feel like a more interesting, like unique, I think, type of stat. And I think about copy as like, I'm a lawyer, right? And I'm like making the case for something. So I evaluate intros like this sometimes too, of like, are we making a good case like for this? And not selling the product so much, but like, are we selling the content in the beginning? So that's kind of like my check for that. But going back to the ick, it's really just like, it's like generic, templated intros with the cliche language.
It almost sounds like the way you would like open a dramatic movie. It's like in the beginning there was dinosaurs. I don't know. Like,
yeah, but you don't have the motion graphics to back it up, so it's just like it just falls flat.
100%. Do you ever write your intro last? I know people that do that and that they find it helpful. I've done it sometimes as well because like you naturally want to start with the intro, but sometimes you don't know what the hook is until you've written the whole piece.
Yeah, I think you always want, it's tricky because you always want to have an angle going into it, right? Like that's part of the strategy. So making sure you have kind of the angle figured out, and it's rather than like just the keyword. And so knowing like, okay, here's how I'm going to approach this. And then you kind of have a placeholder version for both the title, I would say, and the intro. But then always sort of like going back to it and being like, how can I make this better? Or how can I take like some of the insights later on? Maybe it makes sense to move those up. If you have expert quotes like in there as well, that can help with it so that it's more like a more assertive take like on the topic. You may not, to your point, like you may not know that kind of like going in because you're still collecting those types of insights and figuring out your exact take. But yeah, if you don't, like, yeah, for me, I think it's helpful to have a placeholder for both of those things for that reason, just so you don't have to kind of like end up rewriting it because you go kind of a different angle. But yeah, always like go back and look to elevate that. All right, I will. Oh, sorry, Baylee.
Oh, I was just gonna say, I love that. I think there were so many good pieces of advice with there. I love your example of the the dirty hose. So that's really helpful. And I've had Joe's a really good content writer for those who don't know. He's on Dallion and he's on our team. He's our boss. So he just deletes stuff. That's always a really good strategy I think he has.
Yeah, I mean, but I say too, it's easier to edit than create, right? So like still create, like just put everything out there. Sometimes we get in the habit of like self-editing like before you need to, and that can slow you down. So like just create, and then like it's not a problem to edit it later. Like it's not like an indictment of your writing. And like that's like where like I've gotten hung up sometimes too. Is like someone's gonna see that like I thought this was a good idea at one point, and so you want to like edit as you go. But yeah, it's just making sure you always go back to it. So this is kind of in the same vein, actually. So I mentioned we've been doing this for decades. I've seen these intros for decades, but with AI, I think, they're going to be more prevalent. And there's lots of like challenges that come with AI. And so my take right now, though, is because I think everyone, to kind of like partly to protect your jobs, you're like, I can write better than AI, like, and you're kind of like defensive like about the fact that it exists in general. But I actually think, I mean, digging more into it, it's like it's a very cool tool. It can like really help like some of the really redundant parts of content marketing, especially like when you're having to do things at scale. So I'm pro, and I have just like come to like this line, I guess, like line in the sand of I don't care if you use AI to write your article, to like assist your content. I don't care about that. Like what I do care about is like, can I tell that you wrote this with AI, right? And so if I can, then either it's lazy inputs, like, or it's like lazy editing. So AI is not going to like completely outsource your work. Like you either need to like do the work on, well, probably both, but you need to do the work on the front end, to do the right research, right? To like come up with the like creative angles, to have like a process in place, like for those prompts and those inputs, like to make sure that what it gives you is pretty decent. And then like on the back end, you still need to edit it, and like you still need to make sure that it's human. And then you also definitely need to fact check it, right? Like, so it's not going to do your work for you. I just don't want to be able to tell like that you used AI, right? So again, it's a great tool, like all tools, like it's not going to do the whole thing for you.
What are some of the tells that you notice online?
Well, yeah, going back to that first one, like those pieces that I pulled out, like these are snippets like that were like gonna give AI of like, do not do this list, right? So those are like those are outputs like that I've gotten from AI. And so it's like going through the initial output and like understanding what AI is good at, whether it's ChatGPT or Claude or whatever you're using, like understand like, yeah, what it's good at, going through, editing it as you would like a normal piece, and like taking notes along the way of like, here are the places where it's not strong, right? Or like that it tends to be repetitive. Another thing that Katie, senior copywriter that I work with, like pointed out is that it tends to give like the same exact like length for sentences and paragraphs a lot of the times too. So that's like that can be like a good tell as well, is it's like it feels very like monotone, and then like, yeah, just very formulaic is probably like the word, is like very, very formulaic in like the way the construction of the content, the structure of the content, along with like some of the overly formal language is like something that we've called out as well, like overly formal and like sort of informative. Like if it kind of like reads too much like a Wikipedia page, like those are a few things that come to mind.
Definitely. Just one thing I've noticed that I always find really funny is that it over promises always,
Yes.
but under delivers. Like it says, this is the most revolutionary thing,
Dramatic.
whatever. Yeah.
That's the word that Katie uses too, which I love. It's just like, she's like, yeah, I always tell it to like tone back on like dramatic language. Like, and this goes back to the intros, right? Of like, this is the biggest problem like in the world, and yeah, and so just toning back the dramatic language.
That's awesome. And
Okay,
your final ick?
Final ick. But yeah, it's lazy stats, and this kind of, I like that these all kind of like go together. Like these could be like one and the same in a way, but yeah, it's kind of like lazy research, lazy stats. And so like the ick specifically, I think, is when you see an article, there's an interesting stat or insight in it. When there's a source, you click on the source and it leads to another source and that leads to another source. Or often it just like it circles back to another source like in there. And so like everyone's just like sourcing each other and then you can't get to the root of the source. And so you're like, oh, this person sourced this person who sourced like company 3 who like sourced company 1. And so like they're all just like in this interlinking together. And it feels like a conspiracy theory a little bit, but it's really just like lazy research at the end of the day. So it's that, and then it's specifically like the stats themselves. Like again, it goes back to like, is this interesting? Is this compelling? Or is this something that I already knew and that is boring? So yeah, lazy research. And then this kind of goes into AI too. It's like, again, like you have to fact check it a little bit and make sure what it's giving you is accurate, because it will, like Baylee mentioned, like it will overpromise and sometimes it will just straight up make up things. So it'll make up quotes, like it'll make up things. So yeah, just lazy research and information. This is hard though. Like it's very hard to do. We're asked to do like a lot of content and stuff. Like I'm not going to sit here and say I've never published something with a lazy stat or never will in the future. But this is, yeah, one thing that I want us to get better at as a group.
I feel like LinkedIn is the particular place where you see this most often. Am I correct?
I think it's definitely SEO articles as well, right? And I do think that there's like, you have quotas, like you're pushing out a lot of content, like it's easy to get into this. But LinkedIn especially as well, right? Where it's like, because they know it's the hook, right? It's like, how can I use like a stat? It's like the easy hook, right? And so it's definitely a problem on LinkedIn.
Yeah, that's where I see it a lot. I think someone like got out there that was like, use a statistic and it'll boost your LinkedIn post or whatever. And I think people really like latched onto that for some reason. And then yes, it got old.
It's it's an effective formula. So like I understand like why it's happening. And I also think if that is your like content strategy, if you're like I am a big fan of like using your own like product data and using your own internal data or doing surveys, like that's proprietary research. That's interesting research, especially if it's not regurgitated like this. So if you have that, if you have an interesting real like stat, then please share. But yeah, we'll see like a lot of the same regurgitated things, or things that, part of it too is like, or things that are too broad for the topic, right? And so it's like we're talking about what would be like a very like niche down version of it, like a very specific. Let's say it's about like AI content like generation or something, but then you start off with just like a general marketing stat where it's like marketing is very important. We know this because 90% of companies say that like marketing is important, right? Like that's like the generic stat. And it's like, anyways, like let's talk about AI content because that's part of marketing. And so it's like if it's too much of a reach, right? Where it's just like clearly lazy and it's like, let's find something on marketing. This is loosely tied to marketing, right? So I think like that is where it goes wrong too, where it's like you're not building the case like for this particular topic. You're just building the case for marketing, and that case doesn't need to be made. I think that everyone, for the most part, believes that the marketing is a thing and that it's effective.
Yep. That's a pretty bad stat. So that's funny.
Yeah, it's not far off. Like some of the things that are just like, okay, yeah, I probably could have guessed that. Like 90% of people, it's like 4 and 5 dentists agree, right? It's like the same kind of thing of the ones that are like 4 and 5 content marketers agree that you should redistribute content, right? It's just like, it's trying to make the case for a semi-new thing of like, content distribution is kind of like trending thing, but it's like, we all know it's important. Like that's not the thing that we need to learn or that we need to dive into. Like it's about like, how do we do it, right? How do we do it efficiently? So
yeah, I feel like you can manipulate that data too to make any point you want to make. So
oh, absolutely. Yeah, exactly. That's why exactly. I think that actually like you hit the nail on the head of like that's like my problem with it. It's just like this could apply to any article. And I think this, and from a broader sense, like this is like my ick for marketing sometimes. Is like, could you copy and paste your own marketing, put another brand's name on it, and like would it still work, right? And it's kind of like that same thing, like this idea, this like copy paste content, copy paste marketing.
What are some strategies that you have that you would share with a marketer who maybe is like being asked to create a lot of stuff, and they see all this stuff, like trendy stuff that other people are doing. And they're like, okay, maybe I'll just take this formula. Like it's working for them. Maybe it'll work for me. Like what would you recommend instead of going that path?
Yeah, I think if you're getting into content marketing, like getting into marketing in general, like you have to want to do like the creative parts of it, right? You have to like get juice from like coming up with the new ideas. Like if your default is to lean back and say like, hey, like let's just repurpose like this thing that worked over here because you want to play it safe. Like it can be hard to do really well in startup marketing if that's sort of like your mindset. And then I think a lot of it though is just narrowing the scope, because like we feel like we have a lot of things to do, because like oftentimes, we're asked to do a lot of channels, to cover a lot of ground. And so I think if you just sit back and you're like, okay, who is our audience? Where are they primarily? Where are they the most? And then just stick like with one channel, then add another, right? Like, so that you can always go back to, okay, this is what success looks like for us. I think you have to have like a very like fairly narrow view of like, what does success look like for this role? And if it's, like LinkedIn is our number one channel. So if we crush it there, then we can move on to like some of these other things. And so it really does come down to, I think most content marketers are creative and want to be creative and want to come up with those new ideas. And it's really just like a bandwidth thing, and really just trying to be everywhere. So I think if you pick the one channel, like that's where you want to spend the most time. And then once you find, like you put enough content out there where you find like those topics and those hooks that are like really resonating, then like it's like you found the thing, and now you can worry about like the scaling part of it. And you're like, okay, we'll take these things that are working for this channel, we'll expand them out elsewhere. But it really just like, I think for me at least, like comes back to reminding myself like I can't do it all. I can't be everywhere. And so getting with like your boss on like the company goals, making sure like those trickle down, like here are the 3 company goals. Here's how they translate to content. I know that if I hit this, then we're good, right? And that kind of like alleviates some of the stress of it.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, knowing what your capacity is, and especially with quality, like balancing quantity and quality. Because I mean, you could whip out a bunch of AI articles that really suck, that aren't going to do anything for the business really quick. But like as a content professional, it takes time, it takes research to do all that. So we're coming up on time, but just as a recap, we talked about our biggest marketing icks. It started off with the content room, off-brand content that sometimes comes from well-meaning people, as well as the one-off marketing emails. Then the design aspect of the content, making sure there's fresh content, selfish content, those generic SEO blog posts, when you can tell some things are written by AI, and the lazy stats. So thank you so much for sharing your insights on all this, Camille. I love that we had some spicy dialogue in there as well. This has been a lot of fun. Where can our people find you?
Yeah, I mean, LinkedIn is always the best place. If you want to just shoot me a DM if you have any questions or just want to talk content marketing, I'm there. And then I'm also full-time at Teal, so I'm leading content community there. So if you want to follow our page or follow some of our content out there, we are in like the career space and helping people get a job.
That's amazing.
Awesome. Thanks again.
Thank you both.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Content Logistics.
If you enjoyed listening, you can follow Content Logistics wherever you get your favorite podcast.
Or access all episodes at marketersindemand.com. Bye.